Well, hi Keenan. Thanks for being here today and having a yarn with us. My name's Jake. I'm a proud Gamilaroi man from Moree, New South Wales. And just before we start, I'd just like to give an acknowledgement on whose land we're having the interview today, and also extend an acknowledgement to elders past, present and emerging for wherever anyone may chime in and watch the interview at any point in time, and just pay that acknowledgement to the beauty that is Aboriginal Australia. So I guess to kick things off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is you're doing, what you do, things like that?
Where do I start, man? I'm a proud Biripi man who has ties to the Biripi Nation through my mother, and I have Wakka Wakka blood in me. That's from Cherbourg in Queensland through my father. But I was born and raised on Gadigal land in Redfern. I was the youngest of three boys. I grew up on the block, and in my community at that time there was a lot of problems and a lot of unemployment. There was a lot of drugs, alcohol, there was a lot of violence, and then at a very young age both of my parents were taken from me, and soon after both of my siblings were taken from me. I struggled a lot with my identity and who I was, and at the age of 14 I became involved with the criminal justice system and started experimenting with drugs and alcohol. I spent more than half of my natural life in and out of the criminal justice system, from juvenile onto adult prison. Then I finally found someone that made me feel like I mattered and pushed me to push myself to learn new things and get outside my comfort zone. And I was able to use my skills of survival and the skills that I learned on the street to survive, to put them into a positive light. And I started volunteering and started getting back to my community and my culture, playing football, reconnecting with my family, and I started sharing my experience and my journey to try and inspire others, to seek change.
It's, if anyone knows you or has heard about you, they know you've really seen some traumatic events in your life. You lived through some horrendous experiences that a lot of people will never know in their lifetime. In that experience, and also the work that you do, have you seen racism? How have you seen it being felt, or how have you felt it yourself, or seen it experienced by the mob out there or people you're working with?
So I think the biggest key factor to talk about in terms of my experience with racism and the criminal justice system, I have to talk about prison. So here in New South Wales, we have a notorious prison called Goulburn Prison. It's a maximum security prison, and they house us by our cultural identity. So that means we're segregated from other nationalities. So when I was down in Goulburn Prison, I was in the yard with, I think, no more than 15 other brothers. 8 of them were serving life sentences. Not many of them had family support. Not many of them had financial support in prison. And I really, really felt the impact of those policies to separate us. After leaving that prison, I found it really, really difficult to be around other people that weren't black. I didn't feel comfortable around people that weren't black. I didn't trust anyone. I didn't go out of my way to talk to other inmates in prison that weren't, of Aboriginal descent. That prison just is no place for any person to serve time, segregated by nationality. Another sort of thing that comes to mind is the way in which I was targeted and harassed by police through all of those years when I wasn't in custody. I would be pulled over on my street and questioned about where I'm going and what I'm doing, and I never ever thought that it was not normal because it happened to me every day. So it was a part of being, Aboriginal in Redfern and Waterloo, that you would always have to justify where you're going and why you're present or why you're there. The police would, always just pull us over for nonsense and just say things like, oh, you fit the description, we just want to get your name, we just want to do a warrant check, we just want to search you. I remember, being pulled over like 4 or 5 times in one day, and I'd say to them, like, you just pulled me up over the, up the road, and they're like, no, we didn't. So my experience also in the court around, being an Aboriginal person coming from an Aboriginal community, and the lack of sort of family support when I would front court would make my process a lot more difficult than others, because most people would have family members at court. They would have mum, dad, they'd have nan, pop. If I pushed really hard and made it, a part of their problems, my aunties would come to court, but they had their own children. And, I don't feel like through my journey that was acknowledged, that I didn't want to burden my aunties or my uncles to come to court for me. I'm out running the street and doing these things. I'd take full responsibility for them, but the court would always say, if you want to go home, you need someone to come and sign you out.
And do you feel, I guess, having that experience in the prison system, even as a juvenile, and also an adult, or going into those early stages, do you feel when you weren't in prison, in hindsight, looking back, do you think you were targeted because you were something that the police perceived to be a product of the prison system? So there was automatically that red flag because you'd gotten out of Goulburn or wherever they had placed you, and no, this fella, he's out straight out of prison, we need to watch him.
Yeah, always. I'd have detectives roll by and wind their window down and, say, hey, Keenan, you're out. How long have you been out for? And I'd say, you was at court when I got sentenced. You know when my release date was. And, we've got our eye on you, and, saying just all of these things that made me feel like I didn't matter, and like I had no way out of my community other than the skills that I had. And I didn't want to do crime no more, but I didn't really have any sort of support, so I would always fall back to my old habits. But it made me feel, like I said, to make me have bad experiences with them. I would have nervous reactions when dealing with them, and they would try to read my body language as me being guilty of something, which would then, exacerbate, the contact I have with them. So now they would call two cars or 3 cars, and they would handcuff me, and they would not just handcuff me, they'd handcuff me to poles, just to be able to, conduct whatever they need to conduct. And they'd make me feel so embarrassed in the middle of the street. Sometimes I'd be there for a half an hour to 40 minutes, and I haven't even done a crime, I've got no warrants, and I'd have 2 detectives, 4 plainclothes police, 2 vans, nearly $1 million worth of police or taxpayers' money just to do a warrant check or a warrant process on me, and they already know that I don't have warrants. My experience with the police has not been a positive one, and I'm a legitimate, active pro-social person now, and I still get nervous when I see police. Hearing sirens in the car with my kids, I start to shake. I've done nothing wrong.
And unfortunately, that fear, that level of trauma, unfortunately, we're seeing it become an all too common thing in our communities, especially by young ones and everyone who, even if they only have that minor involvement in the justice system, that fear has just become ingrained in us. Being subjected to that firsthand, what do you see as really being a cause of those fundamental failings? What do you see as giving the police or whatever individual officers that may have been involved with you, that mindset that they can engage in that behaviour towards you?
So that's a very good question, and I'm glad you asked. I've had a lot of time to think about police and the way in which they police Aboriginal communities, particularly my community. What you need to understand is they only spend 6 weeks in the academy. They don't get much adequate training. Most of these police officers have not been active in Aboriginal communities, but once graduating college, they are then posted to patrol Aboriginal communities. So before they get to that community, all they know before becoming a police officer is Redfern's a bad place. Redfern has offenders in there. Redfern has drug dealers in there. So these are the guys now that have just come out of the academy, never been to Redfern in their life, but are getting paid positions to patrol Redfern. So for me, it's about getting more culturally competent police officers. Hopefully we can have some Aboriginal police officers from police community. That's been the biggest observation that I've had. You've got kids that grow up in Manly and the North Shore that become police officers that come and patrol Redfern. They don't patrol their own neighbourhood the same way they do ours, because they know, and the research will tell them that marginalised, poor socio-economical community will have poor socio-economical crimes, which are theft and drug dealing. Yeah. So if you ride around in a car long enough, you'll see a drug deal or somebody committing a crime, i.e. break and enter, thieving, stealing from cars. That's been my biggest observation. I have not sort of had anybody in the police service treat me or my family as human people and basically just knock on the door like a normal person without the blue uniform and say, I'm here to talk to Keenan. He's wanted. You've got my address. You've got my name. You know where I am. But they would rather ride around like a gang in a car with a photo of me strapped with 9mm Glocks, knowing that I will try to evade them, and it's like a game of cat and mouse. There are way more better ways to be able to police our communities, and like I said, one of them would be just treating us like humans, knowing who to go to when you have to make an arrest. You already know who he is. His name's on the warrant. His address is on the warrant. Why do we need to ride around and waste taxpayers' money and make these contacts, with the police, a negative experience which perpetuates both sides? Ours as the Aboriginal community make fear in them, and those as the police community making us like negatively, through a negative lens.
That type of behaviour over the last few months and years, if you really look into material that's available, we've seen footage of that of that being exposed, of individual officers who really appear to be overstepping the powers that are afforded to them under LEPRA. In what you've seen in that footage, and I mean, please feel free to draw on your experiences of, looking at what happened sadly with George Floyd and other people throughout the world, and also here in our own communities. Do you think things have improved somewhat since you had those dealings with the justice system?
No. I came out of the justice system and used, my journey as a tool to motivate and inspire people. And since going on that journey, I have seen more footage, more haunting images of, people here at home, and I can point to one particular one, and I know he struggles a lot, Dylan Voller. I couldn't finish watching what they did to him. He's a very good friend of mine.
I met Dylan a couple of years ago. I was able to supervise him in a program at UNSW. He's a great guy, great kid, and just amazing at how open he is and how much he wants to see things change, and what he's going through, and very much like you, how he's using those negative experiences to try and create a positive image and a positive change within communities.
Yeah, and then most recently there was, a young boy in the height of the Black Lives Matter movement who was targeted by police, and he was a juvenile and he was slammed face first into the concrete. And I couldn't believe what I was watching, so I just got off air talking to the drum about George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, and I picked my phone up and somebody tagged me in it. I thought it was a previous incident, and it's only coming to light because of what's happening in the movement. Then I came to find out, no, that happened as I just finished talking about the Black Lives Matter, and particularly black deaths in custody here in Australia. And I know 3 names on there personally. My mind wasn't able to process it. Then most recently there was another brother up in Paddington who was treated, like he didn't matter. He was trying to cooperate, and you could just see how anxious the police officer was. I watched a little bit of the footage, and I know the guy that actually captured the footage. I think the only thing that I could say in hindsight was I'm glad that he went for the taser and not a pistol. Yeah. I'm unfortunate that that young man had to experience that, because my own experiences, like I said, I'm not even committing crimes no more, and I still have a physical reaction when I see police, when I hear sirens, when they pull up beside me at the lights.
Thank you so much for having the conversation.
Thank you, man, thank you. I've been put down all my life, so thank you for the compliment. I find it hard to take compliments, so thank you.